Let me just take a moment to talk to these men who are doing the quote unquote women jobs like flight attendants, nurses, and full time dads. You are the manliest men in the world because you don't buy into this bullshit that limits a man's potential, but you do what you can do to give, your family, your community what it is that they need. You are the shit. I have a friend who's a full time dad, and I have the highest respect for what he does. I have a kid, and I can tell you, it's just one kid, right? I can't stand more than 2 hours of engagement at a time before I start feeling like I'm going to lose my mind, right? My mind also tends to be fairly scattered without imposing structure on myself. So when you're dealing with, parenting duties and you have a kid that just feels however they want and does whatever they want when they feel it, you can imagine what that does to it does that to my brain, right? Like it's constantly getting interrupted. I feel like I'm going to go insane, right? So I would be miserable as a full-time dad, right? Especially in those younger years when they're home all the time, right? But my friend thrives in that role. Like he's on top of the kid's schedule. He can understand exactly what the kids need, how they're feeling, can address them, or really helping them develop and learn how to cope physically, emotionally, cognitively as they go through the life stages. It's a hard job. It's a hard job. He's trying to be everything for them, right? All I know is that if someone gave me that job, like you couldn't pay me enough to take on that job. I would suck at it. I would hate it with a passion, like without a doubt, right? And this is I thought I was going to be a good dad and I was going to love it. Turns out no, no, no. I can't stand it, right? I'm already waiting for my kid to grow up and be an adult, right? Unfortunately, even with some of these cultural shifts in the idea of what a man's job is or what a manly job is, I'm afraid that too many men still buy into this idea that they should do certain types of jobs or that their paycheck defines their worth. Actually, I'm not completely sure what the diagnosis is. Look, again, I'm sure experts who probably research this stuff more are going to have something to say about it, about why there are these gender gaps in certain fields, how much of it is coming from, like, the way that, some of these jobs tend to be gendered, but in the sense that, like, society, like, creates like certain kind of image of this is like a man's job and this is like a more woman's job. What I do know is that right now in the United States, we have a shortage specifically of men in the following professions. I'm just going to name some. This is not the complete list, but I do know that at least with these professions, there is a very small percentage of men in these fields. Nursing, therapy. I'm talking like mental health, like specifically like, talk therapy, right? Psychologist. Skincare, hairdresser, manicurist, early childhood education, and just childcare generally, administrative assistant, and social work. Again, this is not an extensive list. This is just some of the jobs where I think over like 80% of the workers are women, and in some cases, like 90 plus percent of the people in these fields are women. In contrast, men tend to dominate plumbing, construction, and so on. Okay. When you see this disparity, you can't help but get the idea that some work is men's work and others are women's work, right? Like you just see the percentage of people in these different fields and you think like, oh, men gravitate towards this kind of work, women gravitate towards that kind of work. Okay. But I think pigeonholing men in this way degrades them and limits them from doing what's best for them. When we gender these roles that any gender can actually do, you're kind of restricting options for people, men, women alike. Okay. Women complained for centuries about being kept out of jobs that they had the ability to do. Right. So why are we then now putting restrictions like that on men? There's, of course, one key difference, right? Like women were kept out of certain fields and positions primarily through discriminatory practices, through laws uh, that, allowed the discrimination of women in this way, right? That's why we have laws to protect women from not being discriminated. It's because historically, that's just how it's been. Men are kept out of these fields not because anybody's imposing any sort of restriction on them. Like, look, men can go into nursing whenever they want. They just need to apply to be a nurse, right? But it seems like this is a much more self-imposed restriction that men are putting on themselves because of some dumb notion going around that certain things, certain jobs are like men's jobs, right? And certain jobs are not really men's jobs. And it's not even about the money either, right? Which I'll get to later. There's a huge demand for nurses and therapists. And, if you ever tried to find a therapist, forget dealing with insurance, right? You know that it's a nightmare to find a therapist at all, one that's available. But let's say now you're searching for specifically a male therapist. I had to do this when I, came back to California, and I was like, oh, I've seen a therapist, and I kind of want to make sure that I see a male therapist now because I feel like there's certain things that I feel more comfortable talking to a man about. Um, and if you try to do that, like if you try to limit your search to male therapists, like the number dwindles down so much. It's like everybody needs to go to the exact same male therapist if they're looking for a male therapist. Like they're just so far few and far between that like it's just almost impossible to find one, right? But men are not going into these fields in large numbers, even though the job security, the pay is actually quite good compared to a lot of other jobs, right? Part of this is a reflection of some larger issues, maybe in education. We could save that for talk another time. But another part is that men don't seem to see themselves in these roles because they aren't for men. Like that's supposed to be the idea that I think is floating around. I don't think men think this explicitly necessarily. I think most of them just have like a certain ick factor, or it's just not even under consideration because they don't see men in those fields, right? Like nursing is a good example of this, right? Like I don't see a lot of men imagining themselves in a nursing role. They could imagine themselves being a doctor and they might pursue that, but they don't see themselves in a nursing role when in fact nurses make a good amount of money, have a great job security, have great hours. Like it's a good job, right? Maybe we just need more men to be represented in these fields so that we can see ourselves in them. I don't know what the reason is, right? Again, like let the experts figure that out. But clearly there's something that is keeping men away from these fields. And it's not because there's some explicit restriction against men. There's no quota that says like we can't allow men to be nurses. Like that just doesn't exist. Okay? Something I also hear a lot is that these gender disparities somehow natural. The thought is that men and women are just different in some respects, at least collectively, and it starts in early childhood, right? Boys, for instance, I mean, a lot of this biological stuff is actually pretty well established. Boys, for instance, develop gross motor skills generally faster, while girls develop those fine motor skills faster. Maybe for this reason or other, boys tend to gravitate towards like building stuff and doing things actively with their hands. They also have a harder time sitting still at an early age. It's not because of ADHD, it's just because their bodies are kind of wired a little bit differently in those early years. Girls more towards like other kinds of activities. And as a result, they become better in different areas and they're encouraged to move into certain fields that fall along these lines. Look, I'm not an expert in this area, so whether or not there's some truth to it, I don't know. But what I will say is, even if this is all true, we cannot just let this disparity be what it is. This is something I can't emphasize enough, right? Like, it doesn't matter why the disparity exists. The disparity itself, at least this kind of gross disparity where it's like 90% one gender, this is going to be a serious problem, especially in some of these fields. I'm going to talk about this in some detail, right? We can't simply just sit back and say that this is natural and there's nothing we can do about it. It's not an option because at least for some of these fields, there's a lot at stake. Okay. Let me just point out two particular fields to kind of unpack the kind of significance there is in the gender disparity as a serious problem, right? And that's going to be early childhood education and in therapy. Okay. So I'm going to use these two as just simply examples to highlight how gender disparity itself is a problem in these fields. It's a problem not just for men, but it's going to be a problem for everybody, as I'll try to explain. Now, other fields might not have the same significance, and that could be true. It's going to be a case-by-case basis with some of these fields. But at least with these two, I'm fairly confident that we're already seeing actually significant problems with there not being enough men in these fields, okay? Let's start with early childhood education, okay? Men are actually quite prevalent in education generally, but not in early education, okay? Not in preschool, kindergarten, elementary school. These are spaces where men, if you see them at all, are also often not teachers, right? They're in the administrative role, principals, or work in the grounds, or doing something else, right? I'm not an expert on why that is, okay? Again, talk to an expert about exactly why that is. I'll let them figure out if they haven't done so already. What I do know is this, that a lack of men in these early years are leaving boys without good role models. Okay. It's probably also leaving the early education system biased in favor of girls. I don't know for sure, but I have some suspicions that there's a reason that, girls tend to perform better in schools. The school structure seems to be structured in a way that favors one gender over the other. Like I said, there's some probably early developmental stuff involved here. And again, it's each specific case might vary, but overall, I think there are some of these differences, right? Okay. I don't expect women to understand what it's like being a boy. That would make no sense. If we expect women to somehow understand what it's like to be a boy, that's insane because they don't know what it's like being a boy. Like they don't have that kind of experience, right? Look, if you ask me what it's like to be Latino growing up in California, like I would look at you and be like, how the hell would I know? Like I grew up in neighborhoods that were overwhelmingly Latino. Like we're talking like 60, 70, 80%, depending on the time of my life, right? But even there, right, even being surrounded by it, I still wouldn't know what it's like being Latino. And it would be stupid of me to go ahead and try to act like I did somehow understand. I don't. So how do you expect boys to be understood if you don't have men around that connect with them and really understand what their experience might be like? Right? If you don't have men in these positions to guide the younger boys into becoming more and more of a man. And these early years are particularly important. It's really the early years that shape how we make sense of the world, right? How we make sense of like the narratives we start to build about ourselves, about who we are within the educational space. And it's going to have lasting impact, right? Like a lot of people have, like there's plenty of research already on this, right? That those early years of development are so critical that it takes so much more work to undo the harm that's done in those early years than it is to undo some of the harms that are done later in your life, right? Those early years are critical. And in those early years, if you don't have men as role models every day showing up to classrooms and showing them what it's like to be a man, to resolve disputes among boys, to show them a better way, you're setting up entire generations of boys to become bitches. That's really what you're doing. You're not giving them an opportunity to grow in the right way, right? What's crazy to me is that it's not as if men don't want to teach. Like I said, we have men teaching all over. We have men teaching in high school, in colleges. Hell, they dominate certain fields in colleges. So it's not that men are not wanting to teach. It's not something specific about teaching. It's not as if men can't teach. That's insane. Okay. But for some reason, men are not going specifically into early education, or they're not going there and staying there. Why is that? What's the deal? I don't know. Someone tell me. But what I do know is that we need to get this fixed, and we need to get this fixed ASAP. If we don't, we're going to fuck over an entire generation of boys if we haven't already. I'm guessing we already have. Okay? I've spoken about this many a times. It takes an entire community to build up boys into men. You're not going to do it with just the parents are the most important figures in a child's life, but it's not going to be just the child that gets them there. And this is especially true when we already know that, especially boys, they stop listening to their parents at a certain point. You're going to need other role models in these kids' lives to help guide them to being, better men. And we're not going to do that if we don't have men being put in positions where they can be that kind of an influence. Okay. So yeah, the gender disparity exists. There might be good reason for why that is. That again, nobody needs to be doing anything malicious, but the gender disparity itself, I think, is a real problem. It's a real problem. It's not something that we can just sit by and say like, oh, this is just how it is. Like men just don't want to get into these fields and, it's for their own reasons and whatever. Okay, then figure out a way to incentivize it so that men will want to enter into these fields. We do that for women when we realize like in places like engineering, it's like, look, there's not a lot of women going into engineering. It's not because they're not capable. Clearly, there's reasons why it's not attractive to women. We can make it more attractive to women. We could do the same thing with early education for men. Okay? But what I do know is that we need men in these positions. We need them because it is such a critical space especially for the boys that are in need of good role models, to have men in their lives that can guide and direct them in the right sorts of ways. Okay. All right. The other area where I want to give some attention is therapy. I'm not talking psychiatrists. I'm not talking about the ones that prescribe pills. I'm talking about psychologists, counselors, therapists, mental health professionals that sit down and talk about your feelings and so on, right? Doesn't matter what the title is. Like, I don't even know what the distinction is between all these. What I think is missing is men in this field trained properly that other men can talk to. Okay. So I have some personal experience with this because I was looking for a therapist. I initially saw a woman, I think it was for a good year and a half, very helpful, right? A good therapist is a good therapist. One that you could connect to is one that you could connect to. But this was back in Pennsylvania when I was moving back to California because of, work situation. I knew that there was something missing in my relationship with my therapist. I thought it would be helpful to talk to somebody that was maybe I had to find somebody new. Back then, like the whole online teletherapist thing wasn't a real thing. But I also wanted to see somebody in person. And I knew that I wanted to find a male therapist because I knew that there were some things that I think I would have felt a little bit more comfortable sharing that doesn't necessarily have to do with being a man, but I did wonder whether it would feel different because somebody who's gone through something similar, right, at least in the developmental stages and so on, might be, or like at least understand male culture and what I'm dealing with, might be able to better understand what it is I'm going through. Okay. And like I said, if you've ever tried to find a therapist, it's hard enough to find somebody that takes your insurance, is available, and that you can actually vibe with, that you can connect with, right? Add to that, you're looking for a male therapist, and you've narrowed down potential therapists by 90% instantly. 90%, right? In other words, 90% of the therapists out there that are available are women. Only 10% men. That's insane to me. That's insane to me. Might as well just give up before you start. If men are having a hard time connecting with other men because no one ever taught them how to explore their feelings and so on, therapy would be the place to do it. But if you don't have that space with a male therapist to work on it, what other options are we leaving men, right? I have friends, men, who have been trying to find a male therapist for years. I wouldn't be surprised if they all went to the same therapist because there's so few available. This is absolutely unsustainable. Look, I don't want people bitching about men needing to work on their feelings if we don't also give them a place to work on their feelings. And we're not giving them a place to work on their feelings if we don't have more men in the mental health profession. Not as psychiatrists, not some people that are just prescribing pills, but actually talking through feelings to model what it looks like to have real, connected, deep, vulnerable, exchanges, to actually mimic it in the therapy session where it's safe. If we don't do this for men, you're basically saying, hey, men, work on your feelings, be better about expressing your feelings, right? Be comfortable with feelings. We're telling men to do all these things, but we're also not giving them the tools that will be most helpful for them to get there. And we don't have the tools because we don't have enough men in this field. Okay. Again, I don't know exactly why this disparity exists. I do remember when I was an undergrad and I was a psych major, and I remember going to psych classes and I was like, looking around, I was like, geez, it's like 80% women, right? That was pretty common. So I don't know what the deal is. I don't know why this is the case, but what I do know is that this disparity is doing a great deal of harm. Why? I've talked about this already, right? Like there's so much for men to work on with regards to working through insecurities and all the bitch ass shit that, they need to work through, but you can't do it necessarily with just random people that you meet or with your friends if they're not equipped to deal with this kind of stuff. You're going to need a professional at some point. Well, if you can't find a professional, that's a problem. And it's not your fault if there are just not enough professionals available. This is a community issue. This is a collective issue. We need to figure out a way to provide more of these spaces for men. By that, what I mean is we need more male therapists. Like, we need a lot more. It doesn't have to be 50-50. We just need more options. We just need more of them so that it's not impossible for men to go ahead and seek out therapy. right? I mean, I always tell, guys like, look, it's a godsend to have a therapist you could turn to. But I also know that they're going to have a hard time finding a therapist because there's just not a lot of men that are in this field, unfortunately. Okay. And again, these are not individual issues. Okay. I know good men who want to do what they can to help other men. There's something systemic going on. Okay. When there's this kind of disparity, it's a societal issue. It's not going to be fixed by a few people trying to do good work. It's going to have to be fixed collectively as a community. What I want to say is that if there are any men who are saying anything discouraging to other men who are entering into these fields, okay, you need to shut the fuck up. At this point, we need to support each other. We need to encourage each other to get into these fields. And especially when they're trying to help other men, that's when we need to not get in their way. We need to not tease them about it. We need to admire, respect, push, encourage them to continue on and get into these fields. These fields are in dire need of men for the sake of men. This is not for anybody else. This is for men, for boys and for men. We need people, we need men in these fields. We need to stand by them and find ways to encourage them to step up into these areas. Okay. I want to quickly return to this whole breadwinner issue. So men, again, not all men, but many men seem to take pride in being a provider. I personally have no problem with that in general. Nothing wrong with wanting to be a provider. Look, wanting to take care of the people that matter to you is not a bad thing. If anything, we should actually encourage it. We should praise it. We should, people should take some, I think to some degree, some pride in it. That said, I do find that this idea of providing for those you care about becomes something more harmful to men when they make it some central part of their identity, or they tie their being a provider strictly with their paycheck, right? There are many ways to be there for the people you love. And the people you love will want something from you and need something from you. And my guess is that it's not solely your finances, right? It's not strictly what you could provide in terms of your financial, abilities. I'll admit, this is one way that I went awry myself and became more of a bitch. Let me just take my kid as an example, right? My kid could care less whether or not I'm able to buy her all the nicest things in the world. She might be sad if she doesn't get something that she wants, but her disappointment is something that she needs to learn to deal with. That's just part of growing up, learning how to deal with disappointments, right? It's not an indictment on me as a father or as a man that I do not get her everything that she wants. In fact, that would make me a horrible father if I just gave her whatever it is that she wanted. See, what I didn't realize early and, had to really reflect on to understand is that my kid cares not that I get her stuff, but rather that I'm present with her. Not physically, but I mean cognitively and emotionally, like there and present with her. When I spent time with her, what mattered was that I saw her and I listened to her. I was there and entered into the world that she was in and took the effort to really understand what it is that she was going through, knowing that she's still a child, right? I remember focusing so much on work and making a living and making sure that I didn't get fired that mentally my mind was on work when I was spending time with her, right? So like physically I might be there with her, but my mind was elsewhere, and she definitely picks up on it, right? She could tell when I wasn't engaged and when I wasn't listening. She would say something and then I would respond in a way that clearly told her like I did not understand I didn't listen. I didn't attend to what it is that she was actually saying, right? My mind was on finances, on health insurance, on taxes, and all this other stuff. Does that mean that it doesn't matter whether or not I do a good job at work or bring home a steady paycheck? No, of course that matters, right? But my point is that it didn't matter to my kid. It didn't matter to my then wife. It didn't matter because money was just a means to ensure that we can do the things that we actually wanted to, right? And for them, what mattered was that we spent quality time together, that when we were spending time together, that we were actually engaged with one another, connecting with one another, forming just wonderful memories together, right? That's what mattered, right? The relational side of it, that's what mattered, right? No one was expecting me to buy, really nice, expensive stuff, or to ensure that we got like a big giant house, right? Or to go on some fancy vacations. Like that didn't matter. We could have worked around all of that given how much, means we had. What mattered was that when we did spend time together in our day-to-day lives, that I was present and there for them for whatever else it is that they needed, like emotional support or to form these memories or to just enjoy life together, right? And what I think men often lose sight of is the fact that work, money, earning potential, all this can serve some good in your ability to care for others. But we need to look hard in the mirror and start asking who this is all really for. If you really have your priorities straight and work and money is just a means to an end, right? With the primary goal that you be there for the ones you love, if you are really aiming to be a provider in the fullest sense, right? I have news for you. The people you love want you, not your money, right? If you have a genuine relationship, if you have people who actually care about you, what they want is you. They don't want your money. They don't want your job title. They like all those things because it helps for them to develop something with you, right? When you're not under financial strain, it allows you to free your mind so that you could actually focus on your relationships and experience with each other and so on, right? But at the end of the day, the final goal that they have, if they truly love you, is that they want you, the person, right? If your pursuit of money or job title doesn't align with what the people who love you want from you, then you're going to have to ask yourself whether you're actually doing this for them or for yourself. Because I'll tell you this, it's probably not for them. If they're not asking for it, then it's not really for them. It seems like it has more to do with you, right? I don't know what it is, right? Maybe you're insecure about your job status and maybe you have good reason for it. Like maybe you've gotten fired in the past. And so that, was a traumatic experience. It was really stressful and you didn't want to ever experience that again. So you poured yourself into work. Or maybe you want power or recognition, right? Maybe you didn't get enough of that at some point, and then so you want to feel like you're the shit. I don't know. Or maybe you're like me and grew up without money. So money represents for you security, right? So for me, it was a lot of anxiety when I didn't have what I thought was enough money. So maybe it's something like that for you. But notice that all of this is then for you, right? It's to address your own anxiety. It's to address your own insecurities. It's to address something that you feel missing in your life. And now you're using money and work as a way to not address the deeper issues that are plaguing you, but rather you're doing it to avoid the core issues. And instead, you twist it into something about you needing to do this for other people, when in reality, it's you not addressing whatever is going on with you, right? And again, because you're avoiding addressing the core issues like your insecurities and your anxieties, you're being a bitch, right? All I'm saying is this. If you claim that you work hard and want to be a breadwinner, to be a provider for your friends and family, right, for your loved ones, then you better make damn sure that it's actually about them and not about you, okay? The truth is, if you cared about just being there for the ones you love, if you care about being a provider, of being a good caretaker, of being somebody who's reliable, being somebody who others can lean on, right? If it's really about them and being the kind of person that could support the people around you, right? Then whether or not you're the breadwinner, that shouldn't be your primary concern. It could be a part of your concern, right? To want to contribute in some way possible. But if your partner is able to earn more and it doesn't affect the relationship because you're not being a bitch about it, right? Then you can find ways to contribute to your loved ones, right? That doesn't necessarily involve being the breadwinner, right? Like, it's like you lost focus of what actually mattered. If what mattered to you was caring for the people you loved, there are a lot of ways of doing it. It doesn't necessarily have to be by being the main income earner, right? I mentioned my friend who was a stay-at-home dad. That man is no bitch, right? He is doing his part in caring for the people he loves. The situation that he happens to be in is just one in which it makes more financial sense for his partner to, go ahead and work to earn the large portion of the income. And for him to spend the rest of the time, because especially given, if you live in California, you know this, right? Given how expensive childcare costs are, right? Given how young their kids are, right? It makes much more sense for him to go ahead and be the primary childcare, right, provider, right? Like to be the one to take care of the kids, to send them off to daycare, to go ahead and make sure that they, are getting all the things they need in order and preparing for the next stage, getting them registered in schools, yada, yada, like all the things that come with taking care of kids. It just made more sense in his situation to provide in that way, right? He isn't insecure about it. No one gives him shit about it, right? In fact, it's weird because like none of the other men in his life seem to, look down on him at all, right? And he doesn't seem to feel less of a man. And he doesn't need to feel that way because he finds joy in doing the thing that he loves and being there for the people that, are really depending on him. That's what a real man looks like. At the end of the day, I think that men want more than anything to be useful, productive, value members of society. We collectively need to fight to put men in positions where they can be just that. The last thing we want to do is to discourage men from entering into these professions because by calling them or giving them the impression that it's not man's work. There's no gender role when it comes to profession. It's either you can do the job or you can't do the job. It's one or the other, right? And I hope you agree with me that there are a lot of professions that are seen as women's jobs that we need to encourage men to enter. It's not for themselves. It's for the sake of the entire community. It's for the sake of all the boys and men who are in need of these sorts of services from other men. It makes a difference. I don't know what it'll take, okay? What kind of incentive or social awareness or whatever else we need to promote. If somebody comes up with some good ideas, I know I've heard some floating around, I will support it. I will push for it. But what should be clear is that we, in the least, should be encouraging men into entering into these fields. So this is an open invitation. Please, men, consider these fields. You are sorely needed to make a real difference in the world. You are not a bitch for taking on these jobs. It's the exact opposite. The people discouraging you from going into these fields, they're the bitches. You're rather someone who should be respected and looked up to for taking on this burdensome task of supporting boys and men in these ways. You're doing something that few other men are doing, but something that men truly, truly need. And I can't think of anything nobler. So much respect to you.